How many different land raiders can you access in Codex Space Marines? The slightly surprising answer is 8 of them. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, the strategy focused 40k channel, where we're all about getting the most out of our miniatures on the tabletop. So today we're talking land raiders then, most specifically talking through the various different variants of land raider and which ones that I think are the best. Now the land raider admittedly isn't in the best place overall in Codex Space Marines. Point for point, its defense isn't so bad, but most of the variants aren't excessively strong in offensive damage output, and their main weakness is that you have a lot of eggs in one basket, meaning that if you do get into close combat with something, say tied up by one measly Gretchen or something, then the majority of the time you're not going to be able to shoot next turn. For the most part, these aren't the strongest units in the army ever, but it can be interesting to try and make such an iconic unit work, and see if we can get the best out of it on the table. So let's start with having a quick look over the standard Land Raiders datasheet. Credit to Warhampedia for the excellent datasheet as normal. The standard Land Raider, also known as the Godhammer, packs 2 twin las cannons and a twin heavy bolter, so pretty decently long ranged, best at engaging tanks, but can also fight with infantry as well. It has toughness 8, 16 wounds and a 2+ save, meaning that it's far harder to shift than your standard Repulsor or Repulsor Executioner, and they cost just as many points. The standard Godhammer variant costs 277, and it can transport 10 models. As standard, most Land Raiders can take a Hunter-Killer Missile, Stormbolter and Multi-Melter, all of which are pretty decent options to add a little bit of extra firepower on an already fairly durable platform. And they generally come with smoke launchers and the very useful power of the Machine Spirit to be able to move and shoot without suffering the penalty to moving and firing heavy weapons. As I said, their transport capacity versus their firepower is a little bit at odds because you don't really want to be trundling them too close to the enemy unless they get locked up in combat, but they can be a very safe way for some fighter units to get closer to the enemy. So it sort of both does and doesn't want to get close to the enemy. We'll take this as the baseline Land Raider and compare it to the other variants then. First up we have the standard variants from the Codex, the Land Raider Crusader with its twin Hurricane Bolters and twin Assault Cannon, and the Land Raider Redeemer with the 2 Flamestorm Cannons. So these both cost a little bit less than the standard Land Raider, but for me their firepower just isn't quite as impressive. In particular, the Crusader can't benefit from Bolter Discipline as a vehicle, meaning that you're only going to be unleashing those 24 bolt shots if you're actually within 12-inch range. And of course the Land Raider Redeemer has this even worse, meaning that it won't be able to shoot with those Flamestorm Cannons at all unless you're within 12-inch range. They're both pretty good at chewing through things when they are at this close range, the Crusader against light infantry and the Redeemer against heavy infantry, but for me this effective range just is far less convincing. I see their primary function as transport vehicles as opposed to damage dealers, which they do have more space than the standard Land Raider for. The Crusader can have 16 models in it and the Redeemer can have 12, so I'd look to these ones if your standard 10 model transport capacity isn't quite good enough. They also both have the interesting but slightly useless frag assault launchers, meaning that you have a chance to deal mortal wounds if the tank itself charges. Realistically, charging is the last thing that you're going to want to be doing, as that will guarantee that you won't be able to fire any of your guns next turn if you're locked in close combat. So slightly cheaper, slightly better at close combat, but I do feel that the standard Land Raider is a little bit stronger than these, just because of those 4 massive twin las cannons being able to do a decent number to vehicles without having to expose themselves to enemy charges. We're moving out of Codex into the realm of Forge World now, talking about the Relic Land Raider Proteus. This is the one that you can see in the top right hand corner of the screen, and it's basically Forge World's throwback Land Raider to ape the venerable plastic Land Raider that was one of Games Workshop's first plastic kits. It's definitely got a very different feel about it to any of the others. Rules wise, this guy costs a little bit more when it's armed with the same twin las cannons and twin heavy bolter than the standard Land Raider, clocking in at 297 points. Again, it transports 10, but it has a couple of interesting options that the standard one doesn't, including being able to trade its twin heavy bolter for a single heavy bolter, a multi-melter, a twin heavy flamer, or not take any at all. For me though, I would stick with a twin heavy bolter. I think it's the best of the bunch out of that lot. You also have the option to trade 4 of its transport capacity for one of either an Explorator Auger Web or heavy armour. The Augury Web is an interesting one. It basically doesn't let units set up within 12 inches of it, even if they have an ability to set up outside their deployment zone. So it would mean that your opponent would have to keep their scouts and things very slightly back. This really I think is of limited use on one individual model, and not particularly one that you really want to be setting up somewhere where scouts could charge it turn 1. So I would pass up on this one and if you're going for any of them, then take the heavy armour for a 5+ invulnerable save. It is basically an auto-include if you're not thinking of transporting more than 6 models in it. I think that this one's fairly well balanced against the standard Land Raider. I'd only field this variant if I wanted that 5+ invul save at the price of the additional 20 points. Still though, I do think that the standard Land Raider is a little bit better than this, just because a 5+ invul save is kind of limited value unless you're being targeted by something that's AP-4 or AP-5, and those weapons are quite rare. It's worth noting that it does also have the relic keyword, meaning that you would need to include another heavy support choice in your army before you can unlock it. Next up we come to the Land Raider Prometheus, and this one's one that can either be fielded by Space Marines or the Forces of the Inquisition. This one's the cheapest of the Land Raider variants at only 242 points, but has significantly different weapons in 2 quad heavy bolters and nothing else. It means it will pump out a mighty 24 heavy bolter shots per turn. Could be pretty decent if you're Crimson or Imperial Fists. You'll certainly get a lot of mileage out of all of that heavy bolter fire. You could pack in a few more heavy bolters point for point by using things like Dreadnoughts, Devastators or Rapier platforms, but this one does have the advantage over those guys of being excessively tough and having a Land Raider platform to defend it. On top of that, it also has a battle Auspex built in, which means that it ignores cover, a very nice upgrade for any shooting platform, particularly one with middling AP like those heavy bolters. It also has a very interesting rule in the command relay. If you happen to have your Warlord inside it, then one stratagem on each of your turns will cost 1 fewer command points than it otherwise would. If you're using a lot of 2 command point stratagems, then this could genuinely save you a few command points over the course of the game, although of course it does mean that you have to have your Warlord sitting around in this thing, which means he's not going to be using the advantage of his Warlord trait, so it might or might not be the best thing depending on exactly what that is. He'll certainly be a very safe character inside a massive Land Raider though. Overall, I think this is a really interesting variant, certainly provides something different to the standard Land Raider, and has a couple of really cool and quite useful special rules. I like this one quite a lot. Land Raider number 6 is the Land Raider Excelsior. This one costs 300 points, and is one of the command tanks that you can get from Warhammer World. Its rules are sadly now in Warhammer Legends, which means that it's not generally part of the competitive game, but it is still something that you can field in your army in casual games. And usually for all of these, rather than being a heavy support choice, it is an HQ choice, which can be an interesting take to, rather than have an additional buffing character, having another enormous tank in your army, and one that can also provide buffs of its own. Its main weapons are Grav Cannon and Grav Amp, and 2 twin las cannons, which to my mind gives it a fairly comparable damage output to the standard Godhammer Land Raider. It can also take quite a cheap Excelsior Combi Plasma, which I think is a pretty reasonable deal at 11 points, which can give you an extra Plasma Gun and Bolt Gun, and the Plasma Gun won't actually explode the Land Raider on rolling a 1, it'll just deal 1 mortal wound to it. On top of these slightly different variant weapon options, it also gets a 5+ invul save, and basically provides the same sort of rerolls that a captain would with Rites of Battle, allowing all units within 6 inches reroll hit rolls of 1. This is very good, it's basically getting a captain equivalent for free, and his base size is absolutely massive, meaning that you can get quite a lot of your army within 6 inches of him. If you do happen to take a Rhino Primaris along, which is the other Space Marine command tank, then it has some synergy with that, and if it's within 24 inches of the thing, then it also gets +1 to hit as well. Frankly, it's kind of a shame that this thing is in Warhammer Legends. With respect to the competitive game, I think that this is one of the stronger variants of Land Raider, only costing 23 points more than the standard Godhammer, and getting a 5+ invul save and a built-in captain for that cost. It also does have the character keyword, which means that you can do some interesting and gamey things with any rules that interact with that. A really solid and pretty powerful Land Raider as they go. Moving on again now, and we have 2 slight artillery sort of variants of the Land Raider, and these are the Land Raider Helios and Land Raider Achilles. These are both Forge World models that are now out of production, which I do find a bit of a shame really, particularly that Achilles Land Raider is really quite imposing looking. The Helios is 275 points, so slightly cheaper than the Godhammer, and instead of a heavy bolter it's armed with a Helios launcher, which is a long range ignores line of sight weapons, with 72-inch range, heavy 2d6, strength 7, AP-1 and damage 1. It's not a bad artillery weapon at all, pretty similar in profile to a Thunderfire cannon, swapping out 1 shot on average for an extra couple of points of strength. Other than that, it's pretty much the same as the standard Land Raider, except with a transport capacity of 6 to make room for that big missile launcher, and no option to take a multi-melter on it. If you are looking for a Land Raider, and it doesn't matter that it only has 6 transport slots, then I would say that this one is pretty much flat better than the standard Godhammer. It's a couple of points less, and that Helios launcher with ignores line of sight and insane range is far better than the standard heavy bolter. I'm sure it's the sort of thing that wouldn't be too hard to make a pretty cool looking conversion for either. Finally, for our standard 8 Land Raider variants, we have the Land Raider Achilles. This one costs 325 points at base, and it has 2 twin multi-melters and a quad launcher as its standard war gear. For me, the twin multi-melters are a bit of a downside really. They cost the same as the twin las cannons, and I'd far rather have the longer range and higher strength of the las cannon rather than the boosted AP and melter rule of these short-range multi-melters. However, that quad launcher is very interesting. It can either fire as an artillery mode with a thunderfire shell, or a short-range anti-tank punch round with the shatter shells. These shatter shells are 4 shots, strength 8, AP-2 and flat damage 3, and they pretty much share the same range as the multi-melters, with only being able to fire at 24 inches. The thunderfire rounds have the standard 60-inch range, it's heavy 4d3, strength 5, AP nothing and damage 1, and ignores line of sight. On top of this, it has a really powerful extra special rule, which is inviolate armor, and this gives it a very nice 4+ invulnerable save. This is really a lot more meaningful on a land raider with a 2+ save otherwise, as it means that you're going to be a lot more resistant to AP3 fire, such as las cannons and things, and will genuinely keep this thing alive for a fair bit longer. That durability upgrade is well worth the extra points. I'm just a little bit skeptical as to the short range of the shatter shells and multi-melters for any close range anti-tank duties. It really is going to have to push forward and expose itself at least somewhat to being tied up in close combat if it wants to get those multi-melters in range of its optimal targets, and this is at complete odds with not wanting it to be able to be tied up in close combat. I think it's very interesting, and could be even more interesting in something like an Ultramarines army where he can fall back and shoot. It's pretty much the hardest hitting anti-tank variant of the Land Raiders, and also the toughest, but comes at the downside of very short, limited range. Now I thought I'd just do a few honourable mentions. We did say 8 Land Raiders at the start of the video, and those are the ones that are available to all Space Marine chapters. There are 3 more though that are available to just one Space Marine chapter: the Grey Knight's Vortimer Passan Land-Raider Redeemer, the Ultramarines Terminus Ultra, and the Custodes Venerable Land Raider. The Grey Knight's Vortimer Redeemer is 280 points, and it comes with 2 Flamestorm cannons and a twin Psy cannon. That's definitely Flamestorm cannons, not las cannons, sorry, bit of a typo there. The twin Psy cannon is 24-inch range, and it's heavy 8, strength 7, AP-1 and damage 1. So a little bit higher in strength than the standard assault cannon that the Redeemer would usually come with, but unfortunately having 4 less shots. It also trades out its standard assault launchers for Psych Out assault launchers, which are like the standard version, but if it were possible, even worse, in that they only do 1 mortal wounds to most targets, and only do D3 if the enemy is a Psyker. I'm afraid to say that this one's just flat worse than the standard Redeemer. There are a couple of options for buffing the Psy cannons, but honestly I think that these are far better employed on your standard squads. The Ultramarines Terminus Ultra is now a Legends option. I believe it came out in the initial Apocalypse release, and is aimed to be put into service as a sort of makeshift Titan killer. I do find this one slightly funny. They've quite obviously just repurposed the Predator las cannon sponsor and sprues, and a Razorback twin las cannon instead of the standard hull-mounted heavy bolter, and called it a brand new model. It's no longer in production and has been moved to Warhammer Legends, so again it isn't usually for use in competitive play, but it is quite an interesting variant. It's 420 points, and it packs 3 twin las cannons and 2 regular las cannons. So if las cannons are what you want out of your Land Raider, the standard one packs 4, this one packs 9. Probably the biggest bang for buck you're going to get for Land Raiders in terms of damage output point for point. Aside from the high points cost, all the firepower does have a couple of other drawbacks though. It has no transport capacity at all, and if you roll 3 ones to hit with any of the las cannons in a single shooting phase, then you take a mighty 6 mortal wounds all at once as the Land Raider's power core overloads. This means that you're really going to want a captain around when it's firing pretty much all the time, as you really can't afford to have that happen to a 420 point model. In terms of a dedicated fire platform, I do feel that it's just a little bit expensive. For some reason you pay an extra 50 points for the chassis compared with the regular Land Raiders, which certainly does it no favours at all, and just makes it a lot less efficient unfortunately. It doesn't compare particularly well to its equivalent points in Predator tanks, though admittedly it is quite a big, nice unit that you could use for stacking defensive or offensive buffs on it to keep it safe and to deal out more damage. Finally, we come to the Venerable Land Raider of the Adeptus Custodes, who basically pays a slight premium at 322 points over the standard Land Raider to gain Ballistic Skill 2+ and a 6+ Feel No Pain type save, similar to what a Venerable Dreadnought gets over its standard brother. After looking at the numbers, this translates to a 25% increase in firepower and a 20% increase in durability, for which you pay a 16% increase in points cost. So on a point-for-point basis, it is a little bit stronger than the standard Land Raider. It can also transport 5 Custodian infantry as well, which is actually quite a large transport capacity considering how enormous those models are and how many points they can cost. As Land Raiders go, this is certainly one of the stronger ones. So in summary, we have 8 Land Raiders that are available to most chapters, and another 3 that are available to just 1. Out of the 3 in my codex, my favourite is the God Hammer, the standard ones with the las cannons, but I do feel that from a points for firepower basis, it is both eclipsed by the Legends option of the Excelsior and the Land Raider Helios, both of which kind of do its job, but a little bit better. Same with the Custodes Venerable Land Raider, but it does fulfill a bit of a different role as it comes from a whole different army. In terms of variant roles, then the Land Raider Proteus has some really interesting options and some actually quite decent firepower in those heavy bolters, and the Land Raider Achilles is a close-range bruiser, very tough to remove and with a decent amount of anti-tank firepower, but it pays the cost in range. I still do think that all of these could do with a bit of a points reduction to make them a bit more comparable to the other options in the Space Marine Codex. They're currently not the strongest thing out there right now, but that doesn't mean that they can't work in any individual game, and it can be interesting to include some slightly out there options in your list and see if you can make them work. Let me know if you have any thoughts with any of the variants, and if there's anything that I've missed, any Land Raider variants I've missed, or any mistakes with the video, then please let me know down in the comments. It can be a little bit hard to make some of these ones when you're trawling through Forge World and Index rules. Thanks very much for listening to another Auspex Tactics video. Feel free to subscribe if you haven't already. We have regular 40k content coming out on the channel every couple of days. If you have been watching regularly and want to help keep these videos coming, then consider supporting the channel on Patreon, which is what keeps these videos coming. The link is in the description below, and as well as keeping Auspex Tactics videos going, you also get to see some videos early, get to vote on new videos for the channel, and there's the occasional prize draw where I post out some free miniatures to one Patreon winner. If any of that sounds of interest to you, or you'd just like to support the channel, then please take a look at that link down in the description below. And a really big thank you to my Patreon Fireblood for sponsoring this episode. Thanks very much for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.